From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And ahead today, we'll meet the new weed management specialist with K-State Research and Extension, Sarah Lancaster. She'll discuss the persistent issue of herbicide resistance in weed populations. That'll be targeted in her research program here at K-State. Sarah also looks at controlling mustard weeds in wheat stands and on row crop ground with a dormant herbicide treatment, the appropriate time to spray for the different mustard species, and which herbicides are best suited to dormant applications. Further ahead, after today's agricultural news headlines, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven with another commentary on life in rural Kansas. All that right here on Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Welcome to our midweek edition of Agriculture Today here on the K-State Radio Network. Well, here we are digging a little deeper into the winter season, but we do have an appropriate topic in the area of weed control and management to take up for you producers to consider here. And we do so in the company of the newly named Research and Extension Weed Management Specialist here at Kansas State University. It's our first opportunity to greet and welcome to the program Sarah Lancaster. We'll talk in a few moments about mustard control on crop ground, Sarah, but we do want to let folks know about you and what you bring to the table as you come to Kansas State. Welcome to you, first of all.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And the central part of the country is very familiar to you, correct?
Yes, it is. I grew up on a farm, a row crop and livestock operation about an hour west of St. Louis. My dad and my brother actually still farm there, so I have deep Midwestern roots, so I'm happy to be here.
So you're well acquainted with the lay of the land here in the state of Kansas and surrounding states as well.
Yes.
And you got here by way of what path?
Kind of a circuitous route. I completed my undergraduate degree at the University of Missouri in Columbia in plant sciences. And then my master's degree is from North Carolina State University in crop science, and my doctoral work was at Texas A&M University in agronomy. I worked in weed control in all three of those locations.
Right. So. And you had a stint at Oklahoma State University for a time then.
I did. My first professional experience out of graduate school was teaching general agronomy courses at Oklahoma State University. So I had a class that I taught 3 times a year to about 300 or so students a year from all across the College of Agriculture.
And then it was on to a couple of other university engagements before you came to K-State?
Yes. So we spent some time at the University of Florida and then most recently at Missouri State University. So we are thrilled to be back at a land-grant university with a College of Agriculture and an emphasis on serving agricultural producers in the state.
And for those who maybe had not made the connection, Sarah is taking over for the freshly retired Dallas Peterson of K-State, who served for 20-some years as the Extension Weed Management Specialist. So you and Dallas have talked. You know each other professionally, have so for some time. So you know what you're getting into, don't you?
Yes, I know what I'm getting into. So I have the utmost respect for Dallas. Actually, Dallas was influential in kind of setting my views of what a professional in weed science looks like, because he was kind of in the prime of his career when I was first starting. So I've respected Dallas for a long time. Not
a bad mentor to have. When you take this position on, what do you think is one of your initial objectives that you'd like to see through in this position?
As far as immediate projects, I think it's important to get to work developing materials for extension programming, as well as an online presence. Mm-hmm. I think that's something that will be important for me to do well at. Topic-wise, though, I think probably the biggest topic that I'm going to be addressing is the issue of herbicide-resistant weeds. They're one of the biggest problems facing crop producers all across the country and, quite frankly, around the world in this time period. And so I think just helping look for new methods and then educate producers about ways that we can maybe slow down the process of developing resistance and how do we manage that resistance once we have it.
There's been not a small level of frustration with this problem welling up over the last several years, if not last couple of decades. As you view it, are there solutions at hand at some point?
In my opinion, it's going to require a little bit of a paradigm shift, I think, for producers. I know, some of the producers that are nearest and dearest to me kind of developed their philosophy on farming during the era of the big ag chemical era, during the 80s and 90s when there were lots of new products and lots of new developments. And the fact of the matter is those have slowed down. And so we need to become more reliant, I think, on cultural practices, things we can do to take some of the pressure off of the herbicides, because the truth is those new modes of action and new sites of action for weed management are just not going to come like they did in the past. And so we need to be more reliant and maybe more creative about how we utilize crop rotation, cover crops, planting patterns, planting dates.
And product stewardship, right? And
product stewardship is very important. Making sure, one of the first talks I did when I got here was a certification talk on pesticide mode of action, herbicide mode of action, because understanding which herbicides work in which ways is so important for farmers, for making sure that they are taking good care of those tools that we have. Chemical weed control is, really the backbone of a lot of agronomic production systems. It's one of the biggest problems that producers face. And so we have to maintain those products and take good care of them and use them wisely, not overuse them.
That's a message that has been promoted for a few years, but it's obvious you think that can be amped up.
I think it's one of those things that I'm not sure people can hear it enough. Just constant reminders and, looking for new ways. I think one of the things that's going to be really important is making sure we're taking good care of those pre-emergent herbicide products, those soil active products, so that we can maintain that residual component in our weed control systems. I think that's going to be one of the key things that we need to do.
And all of this will be likely part of your research protocol here at K-State.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. My research program, I would like to focus on herbicide resistance management and specifically looking at residual herbicide efficacy and ways that we can maintain that efficacy and certainly not reduce the usefulness of those products.
Well, let's talk about specific targets here, if we might. And at this time of the year, there are rather few, except for those winter annual weeds we know as mustards. Now, before we go deeply into control options here, we need to know exactly what we're talking about. This is a group of weeds that have similarities but have their differences as well.
Right. So the plants that we'd call mustards are in a plant family called the brassicas. The crop canola is actually in that same family. So these are all winter annual species. They do form rosettes, basal rosettes, and so those big leaves bunch together close to the ground for the fall, and then later in the spring they will bolt. They will shoot up a flowering stem and produce their flowers and their seeds then in the spring.
And we can tick off several names. Again, they have their own growth tendencies and the like, but they are dormant, all of them, this time of the year, obviously.
Correct. So these mustards, even though we're talking about controlling them now, they're not going to be actively growing. And so some of our control options are going to require actively growing weeds. So these are things to be thinking about as you're going into fall and then making your plan for how you're going to control these weeds once growth resumes early in the spring.
Distinguish them, if you would, briefly. Tansy mustard, flicksweed, those aren't the same thing.
They're not. So they can be easily confused. They're going to have similar leaves with hairs on them. They're both going to have yellow flowers. One of the biggest ways to differentiate, and it's actually a feature that appears in the spring, is the pods. So tansy mustard tends to have smaller and narrower pods, whereas flaxweed is going to have a little longer pods.
And then the other species that would fall under this heading, bushy wallflower is a bit different than the other two.
Yes, it is. So it's going to have a little brighter yellow. It's going to tend to, height-wise, it's going to be kind of more moderate. The leaves, instead of being compound, are going to be kind of wavy around the margins. So it looks a little different than some of the other mustards that we'll talk about. And
then there's field pennycress, which is still a different animal, and it will appear as much.
Yes, so field pennycress in a lot of parts of the state is actually going to be one of the more common mustards. It's got a broad distribution even outside of Kansas. And it also tends to have a longer window of emergence than some of the others. So even though you may check a field today and not see any, there's still an opportunity for that weed to emerge later in the spring and become a problem.
Pick up on one more, blue mustard, which is, again, very much along the similar vein as these other four.
It is. This one in the spring will be a little bit easier to differentiate because, as the name suggests, the flowers are blue. So otherwise, you're looking at very similar plants here in terms of their behavior and appearance.
And then one of the commonalities amongst all would be that they will set seed in the spring, and that's where a producer wants to step in and get that arrested before it even takes place.
Absolutely. Like a lot of the winter annual or biennial plants that we try to manage, these guys are going to be easier to control before they start to produce those flowers and seeds. So not only do we want to manage the seed bank and prevent seed formation, but just from the standpoint of herbicide efficacy, you're going to get better weed control if you try to control them before they start to flower.
Sarah, we want to talk of, after we come back from the break, what works, what doesn't for which weeds in regard to dormant treatments, which can be enacted here in the winter or early spring period. Joining us, Sarah Lancaster. She's the new weed management specialist with K-State Research and Extension, and we'll be back with her after these moments away. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're listening to Agriculture Today, and welcome back as we're visiting with Sarah Lancaster. Sarah, once more, is the new weed management specialist with K-State Research and Extension. She just took over that position. We're putting her right to work here, talking over mustard control on crop ground with potentially treatments here in the winter or early spring, again with the objective of keeping these mustards from going to seed. We didn't say this earlier on, but mustards are highly competitive with field crops. That's the whole point here, right?
Exactly. Like any weed, they are out there competing with the crop for resources that we would rather turn into yield than weeds.
That's why we're talking now about control options for the mustards. We are speaking of a dormant treatment at this time, and these can be largely effective in a general sense, Sarah?
Yes, they can. So a lot of products for controlling mustards can be applied during the winter as pre-emergence products, so getting ready to control seeds that are going to come up later. And also, they can be applied in the winter as potentially soil active products that the plant then will take in once it starts growing again. All herbicides require the plant to be carrying out some sort of process to work.
Right. So the herbicide options of choice here, and one of the herbicide families that is promoted for this purpose, the ALS inhibitors, right?
Mm-hmm. That is correct. The ALS inhibitors are somewhat of a unique herbicide group in that they have a very specific site of action. And one of their characteristics is that they offer control of weeds that are very similar to crops as well. So these are good products for controlling mustards if you're in areas that are not impacted by ALS resistance, particularly in bushy wallflower or flaxweed here in the state of Kansas. So ALS-resistant herbicides are kind of the poster child for herbicide resistance. So we have to be cautious of that.
Several brands fall under that heading.
That is absolutely true. So some of the common herbicide names that fall into this category would be things like Ally or Finesse, or even newer products like Olympus or PowerFlex.
Are there compounds, not ALS inhibitors, that will also exact some level of control against the mustards?
So our non-ALS inhibiting herbicides, things like Husky or Talinor or even 2,4-D, they actually do perform better when the weeds are actively growing. These are going to be post-emergent treatments that you're going to try to get out there early in the spring and make those applications. And also being cautious of wheat growth stages for most of these herbicides. Based on the crop tolerance, you're going to need to make your applications earlier in the spring as well.
So if you're treating a wheat stand, obviously you're going to have to tread somewhat lightly the later you go in the spring?
Absolutely. There are very few options once the wheat crop has reached the flag leaf stage.
So for the here and now, over the next couple of months or so, one wants to stay with the ALS inhibitors. That's the recommendation here.
That would be correct.
Does it matter whether one treats in midwinter, late winter like February, or is the effectiveness similar in that respect?
The closer you can get to that plant actively growing and using that product, the better off you're going to be. So in some ways, waiting until you're ready to, for example, co-apply with a fertilizer application, something like that might be a better move than going out, for example, in December.
And in fact, that's often the promoted tactic against these weeds and serving dual purposes with one application in top dressing that wheat. And there's no issue with compatibility, fertilizer and herbicides?
In that instance, for the ALS inhibitors, it works. It can work well.
Are there any special precautions that you would offer in as far as using the ALS inhibitors against these mustards, either during this dormant period or very early in the spring, Sarah?
Especially as you get into the spring, it's important to be aware of the carryover potential for these ALS inhibitors in the soil. So you need to be aware, especially related to higher pHs that slow down the degradation of these products in the soil and may create issues for carryover to subsequent crops.
So once again, there are opportunities here, and producers need to study, Sarah, what's out there in the way of mustards and then strategize accordingly as far as applications. And they do need to do so and distinguish, because there may be some quirks to this mustard or that they want to account for.
There may be some minor quirks, and especially, I think I've said herbicide resistance maybe too many times today, but if you have herbicide-resistant biotypes, which we know occur in a couple of these species, then it's important to get that ID correctly so you know the likelihood of having to be aware of the fact that your ALS-inhibiting products might not work as well as you want.
And before we leave this subject, we don't want to overlook the other elements of weed control. Crop rotation can go a long way toward suppression of mustard problems, can it not?
Absolutely. So mustards, because of their life cycle, they tend to be easier to control when you're trying to grow summer crops versus winter wheat, simply because when you're in that fallow period, you have far more control options, far more herbicide options at your disposal.
All right. By the way, there is information on mustard weed control in the dormant period in the Agronomy e-Update newsletter series. There's an article posted on November the 22nd. Go to agronomy.ksu.edu and check out that edition, where you'll see full descriptions of these various mustards as well as the control options and what to think about there. And before we let you go today, Sarah, we do want to mention as well one of the initiatives that you will be neck deep in very soon here is the annual revision of the K-State Chemical Weed Control Guide for Field Crops that is released very early in the calendar year. So with 2020 knocking, the new edition should be coming out soon, correct?
Absolutely. It went to the printer. Actually, our deadline was before Thanksgiving. So Dallas was in the lead on most of those revisions. They were the first draft was due right as he was actually leaving. So he took the lead on most of those revisions, and then we went through the editorial process, and it is out of our hands. So we're looking forward to getting new copies in, though, to distribute.
And just to explain, the revisions each year update product options as well as their general function in weed control. A great deal of this based on K-State field trials, right?
Absolutely. A lot of it is based on observations from the field or, small updates in label requirements, the development of new generic products just to help producers wade through the sea of different generic products that are out there.
And the nugget within this, of course, is the efficacy ratings for these products against various weed challenges out there. And that's extremely valuable to producers.
Absolutely. That is, one of the key functions of jobs like Dallas's is making sure that guys know what herbicides to use when. And
there is much more information within that guide on stewardship and various comprehensive best management practices and so forth. So it's fully loaded with information.
It's a very informative publication. So in addition to the weed control ratings, there's information about specific label information that's necessary for each product. And one of the things that was done at some point is they put in information about the sites of actions for each of these products. So giving producers another tool that they can use to help with herbicide stewardship as they're thinking about weed resistance.
It's a great idea for you producers to get a hold of the newest edition as it comes out. And once more, the 2020 K-State Chemical Weed Control Guide will soon be released out of K-State Research and Extension. Be looking for it either in hard copy or through the Agronomy Department website here at Kansas State University. Sarah, it's good to have you on board. Looking forward to working with you regularly throughout the growing season ahead, and we appreciate your time and your input right here. Welcome once more, and many thanks to you.
Thank you.
She's the Research and Extension Weed Management Specialist with the Department of Agronomy at Kansas State University, recently named to that post, Sarah Lancaster. Incidentally, there is an event taking place tomorrow and Friday in Salina, at which a number of Sarah's colleagues from the Department of Agronomy will be sharing information. The Kansas Agribusiness Retailers Association is teaming up with K-State Research and Extension to put on its annual crop production update. That'll be at the Hilton Garden Inn in Salina tomorrow and Friday. Here's just a quick sampling of the topics to be covered there: disease control in corn and soybeans, nitrogen and sulfur interactions on wheat yield and quality, best management practices for reducing phosphorus loss from crop fields, cover crop and nitrogen management will be discussed, insect control in alfalfa and wheat, and best management practices for measuring soil moisture. There's still time to register whether or not a member of CARA. To do that, go to ksagretailers.org. Again, that's ksagretailers.org. The 2019 Crop Production Update, hosted by K-State Research and Extension and the Kansas Agribusiness Retailers Association, tomorrow and Friday in Salina. We'll return after this break. You're tuned to Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. Eric Atkinson here. And now to today's agricultural news page and these headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, if a deal on the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement is not reached by the end of this week, Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa doesn't see how the USMCA could be ratified this year. He said as much on the Senate floor yesterday. Quoting Grassley, by all accounts, the deal is close. He said he's recently been in touch with both House lawmakers and members of the Trump administration. Grassley said once the agreement is in place between House Democrats and the administration, the process of getting the legislative language to Congress and consideration of the pact in both the House and Senate could happen, he says, in a relatively short time frame. Meantime, House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer announced that the House will be in session the week of December the 16th. Previously, the chamber was to be in session only portions of the first 2 weeks of December. First votes of the week expected to occur early in the day on Tuesday the 17th, the last votes of the week expected on Friday the 20th. That move is not a surprise, given that now there is a December 20th deadline for lawmakers to take action to keep the government funded. This also opens the door for action on the USMCA in the House. Now, as Politico reported yesterday, Mexican officials are now resisting U.S. proposals for supervisors who would ensure that Mexico upholds its labor reforms under the USMCA. The Mexican Business Coordinating Council, that's a major business lobby, is criticizing new labor demands as, quoting here, extreme in nature and completely unacceptable. Now, yesterday, former U.S. Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack and former Senator Blanche Lincoln of Arkansas each reiterated the need to move quickly on USMCA rather than allowing the trade deal to carry into 2020. Lincoln pointed out U.S. agricultural exports account for about $20.5 billion in sales to Canada, $18.5 billion to Mexico. The USMCA, she says, can be a big victory for agriculture that farmers and ranchers deserve and need, as she put it. According to an International Trade Commission report last spring, USMCA would add about $68 billion in overall U.S. exports when implemented, including about $2.2 billion in additional agricultural exports. Government and insurance payments are not the only factors that are boosting final 2019 income prospects for farmers, according to USDA economists. More on that from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
USDA says when the farm sector's financial books are closed on 2019, they'll show not only net farm income up about 10% from last year, thanks to government payments, and also thanks to this.
Total expenses pretty much flat.
USDA's chief economist Rob Johansson says total production expenses will end the year higher than 2018, but only by 0.2%. And it's not because input prices have gone down, but some other factors. First, as commodity prices have dropped.
Farmers have been doing a good job in trying to find where they can be efficient and have been tightening their belts.
Plus, back in March, farmers had already indicated they would plant fewer acres this year, and then we had the terrible weather at planting time, and
we didn't have as many producers planting as we otherwise would have.
And so farmers will have spent less than last year for fuel, seeds, pesticides, fertilizers, more on property taxes, rent, labor, and feed, but it comes out compared to 2018 again, for all practical purposes,
pretty much flat.
Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
Elsewhere in the headlines today, the U.S. Cattlemen's Association is asking the U.S. Treasury Secretary to conduct a review of Brazil's Marfrig Global Foods increasing its stake in national beef packing. Marfrig announced in mid-November the company would buy the remaining 31% of National Beef, the fourth largest meat packer in the U.S. The shares in National Beef had been owned by the investment firm Jefferies Financial Group. Marfrig had already purchased 51% of National Beef from Jefferies and other shareholders in June of 2018. National Beef operates two beef packing plants here in Kansas, as you know, one in Dodge City, the other in Liberal. National Beef also owns a packing plant in Iowa and operates other case-ready and further processing plants in Pennsylvania, Georgia, Kansas, Ohio, and Missouri. Marfrig announced the purchase of that 31% of shares from Jefferies is already final. Now, the Cattlemen's Association wrote Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin asking him to review the sale under the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. That committee is made up of members of several federal agencies and meets in closed settings to review foreign acquisitions in critical industries involving infrastructure, technology, manufacturing, and mining. Marfrig and one of its main Brazilian competitors, JBS, are now 2 of 4 of the largest meat packers in the U.S., with Cargill and Tyson Foods being the other 2 U.S.-based competitors. And a Kansas rancher recently was recognized for his conservation efforts. Scarlett Higgins tells us here that he received the award based on his ability to successfully balance the needs of land, water, livestock, and wildlife in his care.
Ted Alexander of Sun City was presented the 2019 Kansas Leopold Conservation Award November 25th during the Kansas Association of Conservation Districts Convention in Wichita. The award annually honors a Kansas landowner for voluntary stewardship achievement and natural resource management. Alexander purchased the Skinner family ranch in 1984. Since that time, he has made many improvements to the property, including the removal of numerous eastern red cedar trees in an effort to make the ranch environmentally and economically sustainable. In addition, Alexander has utilized rotational grazing to bolster the grassland and soil health and implemented new piping to improve water quality and availability. After attending a ranch management course, he developed and implemented one of the first written drought plans for a Kansas ranch. Alexander also has embraced conservation practices to enhance wildlife habitat. Nearly half of all known reptile and amphibian species in Kansas are found on the ranch, including the threatened red-spotted toad. For winning the award, Alexander was presented a check for $10,000 and a crystal depicting renowned conservationist Aldo Leopold. The Kansas Leopold Award is presented by the Sand County Foundation, Ranchland Trust of Kansas, and the Kansas Association of Conservation Districts. I'm Scarlett Higgins.
And a quick calendar item for you. There's a special Women in Ag workshop taking place in Hayes this coming Monday. It's entitled Surviving to Thriving, Caring for Yourself to Care for the Farm. That program will begin at 5:30 at K-State's Agricultural Research Center at Hayes. For more information, you can contact the K-State Research and Extension Cottonwood District offices. This is Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
I know, it's just metal and plastic on 4 wheels.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
We have reached the time of the year that things start to feel different. Yes, the days are getting shorter and we're moving into the holiday season. Last week we celebrated Thanksgiving. We celebrated it as there was much to be thankful for. While being thankful around the table, you know that others are saddened because of loss. You count your blessings even though you just keep on talking. While at my daughter and her husband's house, I went down to her big, bright and cozy quilting room, and as always, I rummaged through her waste baskets. I looked for the small pieces of material she had discarded, colorful material, and I sat down and carefully cut small hearts. Then I took the cut pieces and placed them, actually hid them, where she would find them sooner or later as she worked on her quilts in the coming days. Driving out to Salina, I was clearly reminded that not everyone will be home for Thanksgiving. Early that morning the roads were slick, and family who were going further west reported on a flying Prius which had just left the road going too fast on the off-ramp. It landed, luckily, upright across the ditch close to the fence. We saw it standing there later in the morning when we passed the spot. Not funny. They must have really flown. There were other accidents where police stood with flashing lights, all reminders to drive carefully and be aware of icy bridges. I drove careful. We were in no hurry. The RAF took us where we needed to go, and once back home that evening, I quietly thanked him. I let my hand go over the metal. I do need to run the car through the car wash to rinse the salt off. I know it's just metal and plastic on four wheels, but after all these years, and having taken us from coast to coast and deep south and north and several times, one does get attached. If it was a horse, I would groom it and feed it some extra hay and a handful of grain for gratitude. Maybe it is because of this time of the year that I have this feeling. I'm not yet ready for Christmas, and I will shun the stores now playing the music. I also know that some families with small children have already set up the Christmas tree, a big one, which reminded me that I should go for an easy walk on the farm and perhaps look for the tree which I later will cut down and bring home to decorate. But it is way too early to set it up. But I do get reminders. While at the farm, I will cut some more firewood of the fallen branches. They're dead and dry and will burn well in the open fireplace these dark evenings. I do light the fire early, especially on the weekends. The short days, the dark days, if the sun does not come out, all help to make this time of year special. The fact that Talina, our daughter, came home from Amsterdam is special. And this coming weekend, all 5 children will be home for a few days. The showing season for the horses is over, so Texas will come north. It will be great to see that part of the family. This year, I have not driven south, nor to any of the jumping shows where they and their clients compete in the show ring. It's been a good year for the barn. They worked hard and were rewarded. I do miss my horses, non-great jumpers, but good horses. Old age took care of them, and that's good. That's the way life goes, for horses and dogs as well. I do miss the dogs, laying at my feet while reading, near the fire in the evening. At times, when a book seems too long, I will grab some poetry. If I need to go to the old country, I will read Dutch poetry. A few words, a few lines can take me there. That is the beauty of poetry. But I'm living in Kansas now. And here is a Kansas poem. The Great American Desert by Raymore S. Nelson. When Pike and Long explored the land, they traversed far and wide. They mapped the rivers and the plains, and made long lists besides, of birds and animals and plants, of insects, rocks and trees. They measured north and south with care, and registered degrees. The Rockies were their western bound, Big Muddy to the east, the Platte the northern edge, the Red where southern ventures ceased. They thought these treeless miles were waste, a buffer to the west. They said no farm or ranch could thrive, but leave these lands at rest. Colorado to the west was lean and arid in the main, with yucca, cactus, dusty sage in canyons and the plain. Kansas and Nebraska shared a semi-arid state, where western regions dry and sere held forth a double fate. Yet settlers came and plowed the ground. Some made it, others left. Some planted hardy, rugged crops while neighbors were bereft. Irrigation came in time. More farmers could survive. The oil and feedlots added depth, and Kansas stayed alive. Old Pike and Long were largely right. Droughts come most years. Not much has changed. At risk are beasts and crops. There is a desert touch.
Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas, featured every Wednesday right here on the broadcast. Our time's away for today. Remember, if you haven't yet, look into our podcast service to access that and for the information on subscribing to an automatic download of the podcast. Go to agtoday.net. That's agtoday.net. Meantime, thanks for listening in right here. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.